They wanted his money. She wanted his family safe. The millionaire never saw it coming. The humble maid would steal his heart in a way no rich woman ever could. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. London, 1978. The rain tapped against the tall windows of Whitmore Manor with a steady rhythm, soft yet persistent, as though the city itself wanted to remind its wealthiest of how fragile all their riches truly were. Inside, warmth glowed from chandeliers and crackling fireplaces, illuminating marbled floors, gilded mirrors, and staircases that curved like something from a fairy tale. Yet for all the grandeur, the house felt hollow, a shell filled with silence. Charles Whitmore stood before the fireplace in his study, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. At 32, he was considered one of the most promising young millionaires in London, heir to a shipping empire, now doubled under his own management. Newspapers praised him as the golden young widower, both desired and envied. But Charles knew the truth. The articles only saw his fortune, not his heart. They never mentioned the emptiness, the loneliness, the quiet shadow that followed him since his wife, Margaret, passed away 3 years ago. His 6-year-old son, Henry, had been left motherless far too soon. And though Charles provided him with tutors, fine clothes, and toys imported from Paris, none of it could replace the gentle voice that used to tuck him in at night, or the warmth of small hands brushing tears from his cheeks. Charles tried to be both father and mother, but his world revolved around business, meetings, contracts, endless dinners with investors. Too often, Henry was left to the care of nannies and servants. Mr. Whitmore, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Collins, the governess, standing at the door. Henry is asleep. Charles nodded absently, swirling his brandy but never drinking. Thank you, Mrs. Collins. You may go. When she left, the silence returned, heavier now. Charles leaned against the mantel, his gaze drifting to the portrait above the fire. Margaret in her ivory wedding gown, eyes full of life. She had been delicate yet strong, laughter always dancing on her lips. The house had been alive when she was here. Now it was a palace of ghosts. London society had begun whispering long ago. Charles Whitmore must remarry. Wealthy widows and ambitious young women lingered at every ball, every charity gala, hoping to catch his eye. But Charles avoided them, choosing solitude over shallow courtships. Still, pressure mounted. His father's old associates, board members of Whitmore Shipping, reminded him constantly that alliances mattered. A man of your standing cannot remain alone forever, they told him. A wife brings stability. A wife brings connections. Think of the boy. Charles hated that phrase, think of the boy, as if Henry were a pawn, a bargaining chip to secure business deals. Yet he could not deny Henry needed more than nannies and governesses. He needed affection, guidance, warmth. He needed a mother. And so Charles reluctantly agreed to open his doors to 3 women of impeccable reputation, daughters of wealth, elegance, and influence, suitors not for his heart, but for his future. Upstairs in a nursery filled with toys and books, Henry stirred in his bed, his small frame curled beneath embroidered sheets, his cheeks damp with silent tears. He missed his mother every night. The house was too big, the halls too quiet. He remembered her singing lullabies, soft melodies that chased the dark away. Now he had only Mrs. Collins reading stiff fairy tales, her voice tired by the end of the day. Henry was only 6, but he already understood something that adults in fine gowns seemed to forget. Love was not measured in diamonds or carriages. It was in hugs and laughter, in someone kneeling to wipe jam from his face instead of scolding him for dirtying his suit. He closed his eyes, whispering into the darkness, "I wish Mama would come back." But wishes never answered. Only the sound of the rain remained. The following morning, Charles tried to bridge the distance. He joined Henry for breakfast in the grand dining room, with a table stretched long enough to seat 30, though only 2 chairs were used. A silver tray of pastries, eggs, and fruit lay untouched between them. "Did you sleep well, Henry?" Charles asked, attempting a smile. Henry poked at his toast. "I had a bad dream." Charles frowned. "About what?" Henry hesitated. "About Mama. She was calling me, but I couldn't find her." Charles's chest tightened. He reached across the table, resting a firm but awkward hand on his son's. "Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. Never forget that." Henry nodded, his small fingers curling into Charles's. For a moment, their eyes met, the boy's full of longing, the man's full of guilt. Charles knew no governess could ever fill the void. And yet, could he find someone who truly cared for Henry? Someone who loved the boy for who he was, not for his father's fortune? By evening, the manor stirred with unusual energy. The 3 prospective wives would be arriving in the coming weeks, each scheduled for an extended stay. The staff polished silver until it gleamed, aired out guest rooms, and pressed fresh linens. Charles felt no excitement, only dread. He knew these women were not coming for love. They were coming for Whitmore. The name, the fortune, the empire. They would see Henry as an accessory, a means to secure their place in high society. Yet he told himself he must endure it. For appearances, for stability, for Henry. As he stood once again before the portrait of his late wife, Charles whispered into the still air, "Forgive me, Margaret. I will do what must be done." But deep inside, a question gnawed at him. Could a man truly choose duty over heart forever? The following week, Whitmore Manor seemed busier than ever. Extra staff were brought in, windows polished, gardens trimmed, and the great chandelier in the entrance hall sparkled, as if it had just been born of crystal. Charles Whitmore moved about the estate like a commander before battle, dignified, commanding, but with a heaviness in his eyes. He thought only of the 3 women he had agreed to host. They were due to arrive soon, and he needed to present the manor at its most flawless. What he did not notice, what he had never noticed, was the quiet figure moving through the halls with a mop in one hand and a basket of linens in the other. Her name was Alberta Greenfield, though most of the staff simply called her Albie. She was 24, slim, with warm brown eyes and dark hair usually tied back beneath a simple maid's cap. Unlike the other servants, who often whispered about the wealthy family they served, Alberta carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not envy the chandeliers or the gowns, nor dream of marrying into wealth. She was content to work, to send half her earnings home to her younger siblings in the countryside, and to find joy in small things, the scent of lavender soap, the sound of the rain, the laughter of a child. It was Henry who first truly saw her. Henry had grown restless under the care of Mrs. Collins, whose sternness frightened him more than it comforted. One afternoon, while wandering through the east wing, he stumbled upon Alberta in the laundry room. She was humming softly to herself, a tune he didn't recognize, as she folded sheets with practiced grace. The boy paused at the doorway listening. The sound was gentle, nothing like Mrs. Collins's clipped instructions or the shallow laughter of guests. It reminded him, though faintly, of his mother's lullabies. Alberta noticed him then. She set down the sheet, surprised but not annoyed. "Well, now what's this?" A young gentleman sneaking about where the servants work. Henry shifted uneasily, clutching his toy soldier. "I was just walking." She crouched to his height, her smile soft. "Walking is allowed. But most fine little gentlemen don't wander to where soap and steam live." Henry blinked at her. "You're not cross with me?" "Cross." She laughed, gently. "Of course not. If anything, I should thank you for the company. Folding sheets can get terribly boring, you know." It was the first time in months Someone had spoken to him like that, not as a child to be managed, but as a person to be welcomed. From that day, Henry found excuses to return. Sometimes he sat on the floor of the laundry, watching her work. Other times he followed her into the gardens, where she tended roses during her breaks. Alberta listened when he spoke, truly listened. She didn't scold him for childish questions or rush him along. When he asked why roses had thorns, she explained it was how they protected themselves, just like people do when they've been hurt. When he confessed he hated the big dining table because it felt like eating alone, she told him stories of her family dinners back home, crowded and noisy, where everyone shared from the same loaf of bread. Soon, Henry began to laugh again. Little giggles at her jokes, wide-eyed amazement at her tales of chasing chickens in muddy boots. He had never known someone who carried no jewels, no silks. He had seemed to shine brighter than all the chandeliers in the house. Charles, meanwhile, saw only the surface. He noticed Henry seemed lighter, less withdrawn, more inclined to smile. During breakfast, the boy sometimes hummed unfamiliar tunes. "That's new," Charles commented one morning. "Yes," Henry said, eyes bright. "Alberta taught me." Charles frowned slightly. "Alberta?" "The maid," Henry answered simply, returning to his toast. Charles did not inquire further. To him, the staff were background, necessary, reliable, but not of consequence to his world. His thoughts were occupied with Lady Beatrice's imminent arrival and the endless list of expectations that came with her. Still, in the back of his mind, a question stirred. What could a maid possibly teach his son that made him smile like that? Alberta, for her part, had not intended to bond with the boy. She had seen too many wealthy children grow into cold young men and women, untouched by the kindness of servants. But Henry was different. His loneliness was plain in his eyes, and it touched something deep in her, a memory of her own childhood after her father's death. She remembered her mother working tirelessly to feed them, her younger siblings crying from hunger, and how one kind neighbor had taken the time to read her bedtime stories when her mother was too exhausted. That small kindness had been everything. Now, seeing Henry's eyes light up at her simplest words, she realized she could return that gift. She could be the voice that soothed, the smile that reminded him he was not alone. Weeks passed. The bond between Alberta and Henry deepened, though it remained unnoticed by most. Servants, busy with preparations for the grand guests, overlooked the moments when Henry slipped into the kitchen to taste a spoonful of stew Alberta was stirring. Mrs. Collins, distracted by sewing lessons and etiquette drills, never noticed when Henry disappeared for an hour into the garden where Alberta knelt in the soil, teaching him how to plant seeds. One evening, as rain pattered against the glass, Henry whispered as she tucked him into bed, a task she had taken upon herself when Mrs. Collins fell ill. "You're like Mama." Alberta froze, her heart tightening. "I could never replace your mother, Henry, but I can be your friend. Always." Henry smiled drowsily, clutching his toy soldier. "You're my best friend." Alberta brushed his hair from his forehead, whispering, "Sleep well, little one." She stayed by his side until his breathing deepened, the innocence of childhood returning for just a few hours of dreams. Downstairs, however, storms of a different kind were brewing. Word spread among the staff that the three elegant ladies were preparing their arrivals. Servants polished until their hands ached, rehearsed dinner service, and trimmed hedges to perfection. Alberta heard the whispers and felt a pang she did not fully understand. These women were spoken of with awe, their gowns, their jewels, their reputations. She told herself it had nothing to do with her. She was a maid, nothing more. Yet when Henry tugged at her hand the next day, asking, "Will you stay with me when the ladies come?" her chest ached with something she could not name. "I'll always be here when you need me," she promised, though she silently wondered if that could remain true. Meanwhile, Charles received letters from each woman confirming their visits. Lady Beatrice would arrive first, followed by Margaret, then Sophia. Society expected him to choose wisely, for each woman represented not just beauty but power. He stood once more before his wife's portrait that night, his heart weary. "Forgive me, Margaret," he whispered. "I'm doing this for Henry." What he did not know was that just a few doors away, Henry was already finding what he needed most, not in titles or dowries, but in the quiet, steadfast love of a humble maid. The grand entrance hall of Whitmore Manor gleamed brighter than it had in years. Polished marble floors reflected the glow of the chandelier, and every vase overflowed with roses and lilies imported from Holland. Charles Whitmore had spared no expense to prepare for his first guest, Lady Beatrice Langford. Lady Beatrice was the daughter of an earl, a woman spoken of in every drawing room in London. Her beauty was legendary, her gowns always at the height of Parisian fashion. To Charles, she represented an alliance of elegance and tradition, a match that would silence the whispers about his bachelorhood. But to Henry, she would be the first test of his young heart's intuition. The sound of horses clattering against the cobblestones echoed through the manor grounds. A grand carriage, black and gold, rolled to a halt. The butler flung open the heavy doors as Lady Beatrice descended, a vision of silk and perfume. Her gown shimmered in pale silver, her hair styled in intricate curls that caught the sunlight. Pearls adorned her neck, and the faintest smirk curled her lips as she surveyed the manor. Charles stepped forward, offering a courteous bow. "Lady Beatrice, welcome to Whitmore Manor. You honor us with your presence." Beatrice extended a gloved hand, her voice lilting but cool. "The honor is mine, Mr. Whitmore. What a charming estate," though her eyes swept the hall critically. "I do believe the drapery could use updating." Charles chuckled politely, ignoring the sting. "I shall consider it." Henry, standing at the edge of the staircase, peered down curiously. Beatrice's eyes flicked toward him, and then away, as though dismissing a piece of furniture. At dinner that evening, Lady Beatrice shone like a star. She spoke of opera, of her travels to Italy, of the latest gossip among dukes and duchesses. Charles listened intently, nodding where appropriate, his wine glass never far from his lips. Henry sat quietly, his small hands folded on the table. When he dropped his fork by accident, the clatter echoed loudly. Beatrice frowned, her lips pursing as if she had smelled something unpleasant. "Do forgive him," Charles said quickly. "He's only 6. "Of course," Beatrice replied, her tone smooth but distant. "Though one does hope children learn manners at an early age." Henry's cheeks burned. He lowered his eyes, wishing he could vanish. Across the room, Alberta stood silently, attending to the table. She noticed Henry's trembling lips, the way he pushed food around his plate instead of eating. Her heart ached, but she dared not intervene while Beatrice's sharp eyes darted like a hawk. Later that evening, after Lady Beatrice retired to her guest chamber, Henry slipped away. He padded quietly down the servants' corridor until he found Alberta in the kitchen, polishing brass pots. "Alberta," he whispered urgently, tugging her sleeve. "She doesn't like me." Alberta set aside her work, kneeling so their eyes met. "Who doesn't like you, Henry?" "The lady, Beatrice." His voice cracked slightly. "She looks at me like I'm nothing." Alberta reached out, brushing a tear from his cheek. "That says more about her than it does about you, little one." Henry sniffled. "She's not like you. You talk to me. You care." Alberta's heart tightened. She wanted to tell him that he deserved love, that no title or gown could change the truth of kindness. But she knew the delicate line she walked as a maid. So instead she whispered, "Remember this, Henry. Hearts can shine brighter than jewels. Some people forget that. But you mustn't." The next morning, Charles suggested a stroll through the gardens. Beatrice accepted, her parasol twirling gracefully as they walked along the gravel paths. Servants followed at a distance, Alberta among them, tasked with carrying refreshments. Henry trailed reluctantly beside them, kicking at the stones. Beatrice barely acknowledged him. Instead, she spoke of her admiration for rare orchids and how she found children adorable in moderation. When Henry bent to pluck a daisy and held it out shyly, Beatrice wrinkled her nose. "A weed," she declared, waving it away. "My dear boy, flowers must be cultivated, not plucked like common grass." Henry's small hand drooped. Alberta's eyes softened as she carried the tray, her heart aching for him. Charles, distracted, did not notice the way his son's smile faded. That evening, after dinner, Charles excused himself to discuss estate matters with his steward. Beatrice remained in the drawing room, sipping wine. Henry, left behind, sat in the corner with his toy soldier. Beatrice regarded him coolly. "Children should be seen and not heard," she remarked. "Your father ought to consider sending you to boarding school sooner rather than later." Henry's eyes widened. "Boarding school?" "Of course," she said airily. "It is where boys of status belong. A maid cannot raise a gentleman, after all." Henry bit his lip, the sting sharper than any reprimand Mrs. Collins had ever given. He turned his face away, hiding the tears. Alberta, passing by the doorway with fresh logs for the fire, heard every word. Her chest tightened, but she carried on silently, unwilling to draw Beatrice's wrath. Still, the memory of Henry's wounded eyes seared into her heart. Later that night, Charles returned, pleased with the evening's civility. "Beatrice is elegant, don't you think?" he mused to himself in the study. The butler nodded, though without conviction. "Indeed, sir." Charles poured himself a glass of brandy, his mind weighing the advantages of such a union. He considered her grace, her connections, her wealth. He did not think of the way she had looked at his son, or the boy's downcast eyes. If he had asked Henry's opinion, he would have heard a very different story. That night, as Alberta tucked him in, for Henry had begun insisting she be the one, he whispered a small prayer. "Please," he said softly, clutching his toy soldier, "don't let father marry her." Alberta brushed his hair gently, her heart heavy. "Sleep, Henry. Tomorrow will be a new day." She left the room quietly, her footsteps light in the corridor, but her thoughts lingered long after. Asterisk, if only Mr. Whitmore could see what his son sees. If only he could see the truth of people's hearts. Asterisk. Lady Beatrice's stay lasted 3 days. She departed in a flurry of perfume and silk, leaving behind only the faint scent of roses and the memory of her sharp tongue. Charles escorted her carriage, offering polite farewells. "Safe travels, Lady Beatrice. I shall look forward to our next meeting." She gave him a knowing smile, certain of her superiority. Henry, watching from the window beside Alberta, sighed in relief. "I hope she never comes back." Alberta squeezed his shoulder gently, but said nothing, for she knew this was only the beginning. 2 more women were yet to come, each with their own masks, each threatening to claim a place in Henry's world. And through it all, she remained unseen by Charles, but irreplaceable to the boy who needed her most. The manor had barely returned to its usual rhythm when word arrived of the next guest. Unlike Lady Beatrice, whose entrance had been a parade of jewels and perfume, Margaret Huxley was known for something different: power. She was the daughter of a shipping magnate whose vessels controlled much of the trade between London and the Americas. Her wealth rivaled Charles Whitmore's, and her influence in the city's financial circles was unmatched. To society, a union between Whitmore and Huxley would be unstoppable. A merger of fortunes, a consolidation of power. To Charles, that possibility was intoxicating. On a crisp morning, Margaret arrived in a sleek black carriage, no frills or gilded designs, only efficiency. She stepped out in a tailored navy gown, her posture commanding. Her beauty was striking but severe, her dark hair pulled into a smooth chignon, her eyes calculating as they swept over the estate. Charles greeted her warmly. "Miss Huxley, welcome. It is a great honor." Margaret inclined her head with a cool smile. "The honor is mutual, Mr. Whitmore. I've heard much about your enterprises." Her voice was low, deliberate. Less flirtation, more negotiation. Henry, clinging quietly to the stair rail, watched her. There was no warmth in her gaze. Unlike Alberta's soft eyes, or even Beatrice's superficial admiration, Margaret's stare was sharp, as if measuring profit margins. At dinner that evening, Margaret dominated the conversation. She spoke of market fluctuations, the rising cost of grain, and the potential of investing in steamship technology. Charles, fascinated, leaned forward eagerly. "Indeed, I've considered expanding into steel manufacturing. With your father's shipping lines and my mills, the possibilities are endless." Henry sat silently between them, staring at his untouched plate. At one point, Margaret glanced at him and said briskly, "And you, young Henry, do you know your multiplication tables? Numbers are the foundation of greatness." Henry fumbled with his fork. I can count. "Counting is for children," she said flatly. "If you are to inherit your father's empire, you must master more." Henry's shoulders sank. Alberta, standing discreetly by the door, clenched her hands to keep from speaking. Later that night, Charles escorted Margaret through the portrait gallery. She paused before a large painting of his late wife, Margaret Whitmore. "A fine likeness," she said coolly, "though perhaps it is time you stopped living in memory. Businessmen must be forward-looking." Charles stiffened. "She was my wife." "Yes," Margaret replied evenly. "But now you need a partner who will strengthen your holdings. Sentiment does not protect wealth." Charles said nothing, though her words echoed in his mind. From the shadows of the corridor, Alberta overheard. Her chest ached at the coldness of it. How different this woman was from the warm, gentle spirit who once filled these halls. Unable to sleep, Henry crept into the servants' kitchen, where Alberta was kneading dough. He climbed onto a stool, his small legs dangling. "She doesn't smile," he said softly. Alberta wiped flour from her hands and looked at him. "Who doesn't, Henry?" "Miss Huxley. She talks about money, and she looks at me like I'm a problem." Alberta reached out, touching his cheek. "Some people see the world only in numbers. But you, Henry, you see it in stories, in laughter, in kindness. That's a gift more valuable than all the ships in London." Henry brightened slightly. "Will you tell me a story?" And so she did, of a boy who planted a single seed that grew into a tree big enough to shelter a whole village. As Henry's eyelids drooped, Alberta thought to herself, "This boy deserves a mother who loves him, not one who calculates his worth." The next afternoon, Margaret and Charles met in the library. Henry lingered outside the door, curious. Through the crack, he heard Margaret's voice. "A marriage between us would unite our fortunes, Mr. Whitmore. Together, we could dominate trade and industry across the empire. As for the boy, he will be raised to understand responsibility. Sentimentality has no place in business." Charles responded, "And love, Miss Huxley? Does that not factor into such a union?" Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Love is for poets. We are not poets." Henry's small fist clenched. His chest hurt at the coldness of it. He slipped away before he could hear more, running straight to Alberta in the garden. Alberta was pruning roses when Henry ran to her, breathless. "She doesn't love father. She doesn't love me either." Alberta set aside her shears, kneeling to hold him. "What makes you say that?" "I heard her. She only wants business. She said love is for poets." Alberta sighed, pulling him close. "Then perhaps I am a poet, Henry, because I believe love is the only thing worth building." Henry buried his face against her shoulder. "I want father to marry you." Alberta froze. The words struck like lightning. Her hands trembled as she smoothed his hair. "Oh, Henry," she whispered, "that can never be. I'm only a maid. But you love us, Henry said simply. That's more than they do. Her eyes stung with tears she could not shed, for she knew the boy was right, but also that society's chains were crueler than any truth of the heart. That evening, Charles escorted Margaret to her carriage. She pressed his hand firmly. Think on my proposal, Mr. Whitmore. Together, we can shape the future. Charles bowed. I shall consider it. Margaret gave a thin smile before stepping into the carriage. From the upper window, Henry watched her go, his small face pressed against the glass. Beside him, Alberta stood silently, her hand resting on his shoulder. She'll never be my mother, Henry whispered. Alberta said nothing, but inside, her heart whispered the same. As the carriage rolled away, Charles returned to his study, weighing the advantages of Margaret's offer. To him it was strategy. To his son, it had been a cold betrayal. And in the quiet corners of the house, Alberta remained unnoticed, humble, yet the only one who truly filled the emptiness left in both father and son. 2 women had come and gone. 1 more remained, and with her would come the final proof of what kind of woman truly belonged at Whitmore Manor. The invitations went out 2 days later, written on Charles Whitmore's fine embossed stationery. A private dinner was to be held at the manor in honor of Miss Sophia Aldrich, daughter of a prominent member of Parliament, where Lady Beatrice had dazzled with beauty and Margaret had strategized with power. Sophia's reputation was one of political refinement. She was known for her sharp wit, impeccable manners, and ability to converse about the affairs of Parliament as if she herself held office. To Charles, who moved frequently in London circles of influence, a marriage to Sophia promised connections that money alone could not buy. On the appointed evening, the grand doors of Whitmore Manor swung open. Sophia stepped inside in a gown of pale ivory silk, her every movement graceful, as if rehearsed. Pearls draped elegantly at her throat, and her gloved hands carried a small fan she flicked open with delicate precision. Mr. Whitmore, she greeted Charles with a soft smile. It is an honor to step into a home so celebrated in London society. The honor is mine, Miss Aldrich, Charles replied warmly. May I present my son, Henry? Henry shuffled forward, bowing stiffly as he had been taught. Sophia's smile did not reach her eyes. A handsome boy, she said politely, before turning her full attention back to Charles. He will one day be quite the gentleman, I am sure. Henry felt invisible. The dining room glittered with candlelight, crystal glasses, and polished silver. Sophia sat beside Charles, engaging him in spirited discussion about trade policies and parliamentary reforms. Her voice was confident, her knowledge impressive. Charles listened attentively, nodding at her every point. Henry sat across from him, silent, pushing peas around his plate. Alberta, standing quietly in the corner, noticed the boy's downcast expression. At one point, Sophia turned to Henry with a carefully composed smile. And tell me, young man, what are your views on the matter? Henry blinked, confused. On what, miss? On the tariff laws, of course. Henry stared blankly. He was 6 years old. Sophia gave a light laugh that dripped with condescension. Oh, never mind. Perhaps when you are older, you will have more to contribute. Charles chuckled politely. Alberta's stomach twisted. Midway through dinner, a servant poured wine into Charles's glass. Henry, reaching for his cup of water, tipped it clumsily. The liquid splashed across the tablecloth, dripping onto Sophia's silken gown. For a frozen moment, the room went silent. Then Sophia rose abruptly, her face taut with disdain. Clumsy child, she snapped. Look what you've done. Do you have no manners? Henry's eyes filled with tears. He stammered. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Sorry does not mend silk, Sophia said sharply, dabbing at her dress. A boy of your age ought to know better. Such behavior is entirely unacceptable. Charles opened his mouth, but no defense came. He was too stunned, too conscious of the eyes upon him. It was Alberta who moved forward, kneeling beside Henry. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It was only water, Miss Aldrich. The boy meant no harm. Sophia's gaze flicked to Alberta, full of scorn. I do not speak to servants. Alberta's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Henry leaned into her touch, trying to hide his tears. When dinner ended, Sophia excused herself early, claiming fatigue from her journey. She did not bid Henry good night. After she departed, Henry retreated to the library, curling up in one of the high-backed chairs. Alberta found him there, clutching a book he wasn't truly reading. I ruined everything, he whispered. Father wanted her, and I made her hate me. Alberta knelt beside him, her eyes soft. You ruined nothing, Henry. Accidents happen. Anyone with kindness in their heart would understand that. She called me clumsy, and Father didn't say anything. Alberta drew him into her arms. Your father is a man caught between what society expects and what his heart needs. Sometimes that makes him slow to speak. But you, Henry, you are not clumsy. You are brave. You are kind. And you are loved. The boy's small body relaxed against her. By you? Alberta smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. Always by me. Later that night, Charles sat alone in his study. A glass of brandy rested untouched on the desk. He replayed Sophia's words, her condescension, her cold dismissal of his son. Her refinement was undeniable, her political connections invaluable. And yet, something within him recoiled at the memory of her sharp voice cutting through the dining hall. He thought of Alberta's hand on Henry's shoulder, her calm defense. A servant should not have spoken out during a formal dinner, yet her words had been the only balm in that moment. Charles rubbed his temples. He had sought a wife who could bring strength, wealth, and status. But what good was any of it if it came at the cost of his son's happiness? In the servants' quarters, whispers spread quickly. Did you hear the way she scolded young Master Henry? One maid murmured. Cold as marble. That one, another said. And did you see how Alberta comforted the boy? Like a mother she was. Alberta flushed when she heard them, but said nothing. Her heart was already too full of a child's tears. The weight of his small body pressed against her in the library. The next morning, Henry tugged on Alberta's sleeve as she folded laundry. Don't let Father marry her, he whispered urgently. She doesn't love us. She doesn't even like us. Alberta knelt, meeting his earnest gaze. Henry, your father must choose for himself. But he doesn't see what I see, Henry insisted. He doesn't see you. Her heart lurched, but she hushed him gently. That is enough, Henry. Now off with you. The sun is shining. You should play in the garden. But when he had gone, Alberta sat for a long while, staring at the folded sheets in her lap. Her thoughts a tangle she dared not untangle. Sophia left the manor the following day, her farewell curt. It has been instructive, she said coolly to Charles, but I fear our visions do not align. Charles bowed. Indeed, Miss Aldrich. Safe travels. The carriage rattled away, leaving only silence in its wake. Henry watched from the window, relief flooding his young face. Good riddance, he whispered. Beside him, Alberta placed a steadying hand on his back. She said nothing, but her thoughts mirrored his exactly. 3 women had come and gone, each one wealthy, each one promising, each one hollow. Charles sat in his study that evening, staring into the fire. He had chased fortune and influence, only to find his house emptier with each guest who departed. Meanwhile, the laughter of his son echoed faintly from the garden, carried on the evening breeze. And beside that laughter, always was Alberta's voice. He had not yet admitted it to himself, but the truth was stirring. A truth that would reveal itself fully only when tragedy struck, when Alberta would risk everything without hesitation, and prove what none of the wealthy women ever could. The manor felt different after Sophia's departure. For all her refinement and eloquence, she had left behind only silence and unease. Charles buried himself in business meetings, attending luncheons in the city, while Henry returned to the garden and the library, his two favorite haunts. But in both places, Alberta was never far away. One bright morning, Alberta found Henry crouched among the roses, trying to capture a butterfly in a jar. "Careful, Henry," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "If you trap it, the butterfly won't live long." Henry frowned. "But I just want to keep it close." Alberta smiled faintly. "Sometimes the kindest way to keep something close is to let it be free." Henry tilted his head, thinking it over. Then, with a small sigh, he lifted the jar's lid. The butterfly soared upward, wings shimmering in the sunlight. Henry watched it disappear into the blue sky. "You always make things make sense," he said. Alberta laughed softly, brushing dirt from his sleeve. "I only remind you of what you already know in here." She tapped his chest, right over his heart. From the veranda, Charles watched the scene unfold. He had come outside to take the morning air, but his eyes had fixed on the pair without realizing. Henry's laughter carried upward, light and full. So different from the anxious silence he often showed during dinners with society's women. And Alberta, there was something about the way she crouched in the dirt, unbothered by the soil staining her apron, entirely focused on the boy's feelings rather than appearances. Charles frowned, unsettled. Why should it matter to him how a maid spoke to his son? And yet, as Henry darted back to Alberta's side, giggling over some new game they invented with sticks and stones, Charles felt an ache he could not name. That evening, Henry refused to sleep until Alberta told him a story. She sat at the edge of his bed, tucking the blanket around him. "Which one shall it be tonight?" she asked. "The one about the brave knight," Henry replied eagerly. "The one who fought the dragon to save the village." Alberta smiled. She spun the tale with gentle tones, her hands weaving pictures in the air. Henry's eyes grew heavy as he listened, his breathing slowing, his small hand clutching hers. Charles passed by the doorway just as Alberta leaned forward to kiss Henry's forehead. "Sleep well, my brave knight," she whispered. Charles paused in the hall, hidden in shadow. Something tightened in his chest at the sight. The way Henry clung to her, the way her voice soothed him with more tenderness than Charles had known in years. One Sunday afternoon, Charles took Henry and Alberta for a walk near the Thames. It was a breezy day, the river's surface rippling like silver. Henry scampered ahead, clutching Alberta's hand. He pointed at everything. A passing boat, a swan gliding across the water, a vendor selling roasted chestnuts. Charles followed at a slower pace, his eyes drawn again and again to Alberta. At one point, Henry tripped on a loose stone. Before Charles could react, Alberta had knelt, dusting off his trousers, murmuring reassurance. "Up you get, little one. You're stronger than a tumble." Henry grinned, leaping up as if nothing had happened. Charles exhaled slowly, shaken by how natural it all seemed. It was as though Henry had always belonged at Alberta's side. That evening, after supper, Henry surprised Charles with a question. "Father," he said, swinging his legs under the dining table, "why don't you smile when the fancy women come, but you smile when Alberta tells me stories?" Charles nearly choked on his wine. "What are you saying, Henry?" "I'm saying you look sad when they're here, but with Alberta you look less sad. Sometimes you even look happy." Charles glanced quickly at Alberta, who was clearing dishes in silence, her cheeks flushed. "That will do, Henry," Charles said curtly. "Mind your manners." But later, alone in his study, he poured himself a brandy and stared into the fire. Out of the mouths of children. One night, a violent storm swept through the estate. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rattled the walls. Henry woke, crying, frightened by the lightning. Alberta rushed to his room without hesitation. She climbed onto the bed, wrapping her arms around him. "Hush, it's only the sky grumbling," she soothed. "The clouds are just quarreling, that's all." Henry buried his face in her shoulder. "Don't leave me." "I won't leave, Henry. Not tonight. Not ever if you don't want me to." Charles entered quietly, drawn by the noise. He stopped at the threshold. There was Henry, safe in Alberta's embrace, his sobs fading, his fear melting away. And there was Alberta, cradling the boy as though he were her own flesh and blood. For the first time in years, Charles felt tears sting his eyes. In the days that followed, Charles found himself restless. The meetings with business partners, the society luncheons, even the evening papers, all felt hollow. His mind returned again and again to the sound of Alberta's voice soothing Henry, to the sight of her bent in laughter over some silly game. It was absurd. She was a maid. She lived in his house not as a guest, but as a servant. And yet, she had done what no other woman had managed. She had given his son joy. And if Charles was honest with himself, she had given him something too. A reminder of warmth. A glimpse of home, not just a house. But to admit such feelings? Society would scorn him. His peers would mock him. And perhaps worst of all, Alberta herself might reject him, thinking his attention nothing more than a cruel jest. So he kept silent. One morning, as Alberta helped Henry into his boots, he blurted out, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry you." Alberta froze. "Hen, you're the only one who makes me happy. Father should marry you, but if he doesn't, I will." Her heart twisted. She laughed softly, though her eyes stung. "You silly boy. I'll be much too old by then." "Then Father should do it now," Henry insisted, "before someone else takes you away." Charles, passing by the doorway at that very moment, stopped dead in his tracks. The words pierced him like an arrow. He said nothing, merely continued down the hall. But Henry's voice echoed in his mind long into the night. As summer deepened, life at Whitmore Manor seemed deceptively peaceful. Henry thrived under Alberta's care. Charles's heart wavered, though he dared not admit why. But fate has a way of stripping away illusions. Soon, an incident would arise that would lay bare the truth. An accident that would show who truly had Henry's best interests at heart. And in that moment, Charles would finally see the difference between shallow affection and love that risked everything. The Whitmore estate was alive with activity. Charles had planned a summer gathering, inviting not only business partners, but also the 3 wealthy women who had, in different ways, shown their interest. He had not formally chosen any of them, but society expected him to settle soon. The garden was prepared with lanterns strung between trees, tables laden with fine food, and a small orchestra playing cheerful music. Guests in gowns and coats mingled, sipping champagne. Charles moved among them with practiced ease, but Henry trailed at his heels, bored and restless. And as always, Alberta was nearby, ensuring Henry was watched over while keeping herself to the shadows. Lady Beatrice arrived first, glittering in sapphire silk. She kissed Charles's cheek, her perfume heavy. Margaret swept in next, her voice already booming as she boasted of her latest philanthropic project. Sophia, pale and poised, arrived last, speaking of the upcoming parliamentary debates. Each greeted Charles warmly, their smiles wide, their eyes calculating, but none of them bent to greet Henry. The boy stood quietly at his father's side, ignored, until Alberta crouched down beside him. "Would you like to walk by the fountain, Henry?" she asked softly. Henry nodded eagerly, slipping his hand into hers. Charles watched them go, a flicker of something stirring in his chest. The party carried on with laughter and chatter. But Henry, full of energy, darted away from Alberta's side near the fountain. "Henry, not too far," Alberta called, gathering her skirts as she hurried after him. The boy ran toward the edge of the garden, where the land sloped down sharply toward the riverbank. Guests glanced up, some smiling indulgently at the child's antics, none thinking it dangerous. "Henry," Charles's voice carried now sharper. He too began to stride forward. Henry turned, grinning mischievously. Then his foot caught on a root. With a cry, he stumbled, tumbling down the slope. Gasps erupted among the crowd. At the bottom, the boy landed hard, perilously close to the rushing river. Charles's blood ran cold. He sprinted toward the slope, but it was steep, slippery, with grass dampened from a morning rain. "Good heavens!" Lady Beatrice cried, clutching her skirts but making no move. Margaret lifted a hand to her mouth. "Someone must fetch help." Sophia paled, muttering, "The river can be swept away." But none of them moved, not one. Before Charles could take another step, a blur of motion passed him. Alberta. She tore down the slope, heedless of the mud smearing her gown. She slid the last few feet, scrambling across the earth to where Henry lay, dazed and frightened. "Henry, hold on to me," she shouted, her arms wrapping tightly around him just as the boy's foot slipped toward the water's edge. The current surged, spraying cold mist into her face. She dug her heels into the muddy bank, straining to pull him back. "Father," Henry cried, clinging to her neck. "I've got you, Henry," Alberta whispered fiercely. "I will not let go." Charles descended as fast as he dared, slipping and sliding. When he reached them, Alberta was half kneeling in the mud, Henry in her arms, her own body dangerously close to being pulled in. Charles grasped them both, hauling with all his strength. Together, they tumbled back onto the slope, breathless, mud-streaked, but safe. Henry clung to Alberta, sobbing. "You saved me. You saved me." Charles's heart pounded. His son was safe, alive, because of her. The crowd at the top of the slope stood frozen, murmuring. None dared descend. Lady Beatrice dabbed delicately at her eyes with a handkerchief. Margaret fanned herself, muttering about the danger. Sophia merely shook her head, lips pursed. But it was Alberta who had acted. Alberta, who had risked everything without hesitation. Charles looked up at the onlookers, his expression like stone. Then he looked down at Alberta. Mud smeared across her face, hair tumbling loose, her arms still cradling his son as though nothing else in the world mattered. In that moment, something inside him broke, or perhaps it healed. The party ended abruptly. Guests made excuses, carriages rolled away, and the garden grew quiet. In Henry's chamber, Alberta bathed the boy's scraped knees and kissed his damp forehead. "There, now you're safe. That's what matters." Henry caught her hand. "Don't leave me, Alberta. Ever." She smiled faintly. "I won't, Henry. I promise." Charles stood at the doorway, unseen, his throat tight. He had seen many things in his life, deals struck, fortunes gained and lost. But never had he seen such fierce devotion. That night, long after Henry had fallen asleep, Charles paced his study. His mind replayed the image of Alberta leaping into danger, the way she had clung to Henry, the steadiness in her voice. And then he compared it to the women above, frozen in place, waiting for someone else to act. Wealth, beauty, power. None of it had mattered when his son's life hung in the balance. But love had mattered, and love had saved him. Charles sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He knew, finally, what his heart had been trying to tell him all along. The question was, did Alberta feel the same? Later, when Alberta returned to her small room in the servants' wing, Henry stirred in his sleep. He whispered, half dreaming, "Father, marry her, marry Alberta." Charles, who had come to check on his son, froze at the bedside. The child's words were soft, but they struck him like a bell. Perhaps it was not just his own heart at stake. Perhaps Henry's happiness, his healing, depended on it too. The house was quiet. Outside, the river flowed on, indifferent to the lives it had nearly claimed. But within Whitmore Manor, something had shifted forever. Charles could no longer see Alberta as merely a maid. She was the woman who had risked everything for his son. The woman who had shown him what love truly looked like. And though he had not yet spoken it aloud, a resolve was forming. Soon he would make his choice. The morning after the incident, Whitmore Manor was unusually hushed. The servants moved with subdued efficiency, speaking in whispers as though the house itself was catching its breath after the chaos of the previous evening. Charles rose early, unable to sleep. He had paced his chambers through most of the night, torn between gratitude, admiration, and emotions he dared not yet name. He told himself it was only because Alberta had saved Henry, but in the deepest part of his heart, he knew it was more. He found Alberta in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, preparing Henry's breakfast herself despite the cook's protests. "You needn't do that," Charles said, his voice softer than usual. She looked up, startled. A strand of hair had slipped loose from her braid, falling across her cheek. "I don't mind, sir. Henry was unsettled last night. I thought something simple, porridge with honey, might comfort him." Charles hesitated. "You've done more for my son than I could ever repay. You risked your life." Alberta shook her head quickly. "Please, sir, don't thank me. Any decent soul would have done the same." "No," Charles said firmly. "Not everyone would have. I saw the others. They froze. You didn't." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Because Henry is more than just your son to me. He's family in my heart." The words struck him with quiet force. When Henry appeared, bright-eyed despite the scrape on his forehead, he climbed into Alberta's lap before touching his father's hand. "Father," he said with the blunt honesty of a child, "you should marry Alberta." Alberta gasped, color rising in her cheeks. "Henry, that's not..." Charles felt his heart stop for a moment. "Why do you say that, Henry?" "Because she loves me, and you love me, and I love her. That means we're already a family, and families are supposed to stay together." The boy's simple logic pierced through layers of propriety, expectation, and pride. Charles smiled faintly, ruffling his son's hair. "You are wiser than your years, Henry." But Alberta shook her head, flustered. "Henry, that's not how the world works. Your father is..." She stopped herself, her throat tightening. Charles finished for her gently. A man who was beginning to see the world differently. All day, Charles wrestled with his thoughts. Society would never approve of him marrying a maid. His business partners, his peers, they would whisper, scorn, question his judgment. But he remembered the icy terror of nearly losing Henry. In that moment, no amount of wealth or reputation had mattered. Only love, loyalty, and courage. Alberta had all three, and he realized with painful clarity that Beatrice, Margaret, and Sophia had none. That evening, Charles sought Alberta in the garden. She was near the riverbank, the very place of the incident, her hands folded tightly as if in prayer. "Why here?" Charles asked as he approached. She turned, startled. "I needed to see it again, to remind myself how close it was, how precious life is." He studied her face, the quiet strength, the tenderness she carried in every gesture. "Alberta, I must say what I've been holding inside. Yesterday showed me more truth than all the years of wealth and business ever did. You are the one I trust with my son and with my heart." Her lips parted in shock. "Sir, you mustn't." "Charles," he interrupted softly. "Call me Charles, at least when it is just us." Her eyes shimmered with conflict. "Charles, I am your maid. Nothing more. If anyone knew..." "Let them know," he said fiercely. "Let them whisper and scoff. I would rather be scorned for loving a good woman than praised for marrying a cold one." Alberta trembled, torn between longing and fear. "But I could never give you the riches those women offer. I could never give you prestige. You have already given me more than all of them combined. Charles said, stepping closer. You gave me back my son. You gave me back hope. Alberta, don't you see? You've already given me everything that matters. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the rush of the river. Charles reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Her pulse raced under his touch. His other hand rose, almost without thought, to brush the strand of hair from her cheek. Alberta's breath caught, her lips parting. For one suspended moment, it seemed inevitable that the distance between them would vanish, that the barriers of class, status, and fear would dissolve in a single kiss. But Alberta stepped back suddenly, pressing a hand to her chest. No, not yet. If you truly mean what you say, Charles, then prove it not just with words whispered in secret, but with choices made in the light. Until then, I cannot let myself believe. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with quiet resolve. Charles stood rooted to the spot, torn between frustration and admiration. She was right. Alberta was not a woman to be hidden, to be loved in shadows. She deserved more. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Lady Beatrice, Margaret, and Sophia gathered at a private salon. Each had heard whispers of the incident, though accounts varied. Some say the maid saved the boy, Sophia remarked coldly. Margaret sniffed. If true, then she only did her duty. That is what she is paid for. But Beatrice's eyes narrowed. I've heard Charles looks at her differently now. If he truly considers marrying her. Impossible, Sophia scoffed. Unthinkable, Margaret agreed. Yet all three wore expressions not of disbelief, but of fear, because deep down they knew it was possible. That night, Charles stood once more at his window, watching the lanterns swaying gently in the garden. He thought of Alberta's words, her refusal to be a secret, her challenge to prove his devotion openly. It was a challenge he intended to meet. He would not let her slip through his fingers. Not this woman. Not this love. Charles turned away from the window and whispered into the darkness. Soon, Alberta. Soon the whole world will know. The Whitmore estate had not seen such bustle in years. Word had spread that Charles Whitmore intended to host a grand banquet, one to which the city's elite were invited. Speculation abounded. Was this the evening he would finally declare his intentions toward one of the wealthy women who circled him like moths to a flame? The three, Lady Beatrice, Margaret, and Sophia, each received gilt-edged invitations. Their households erupted with excitement. At last, whispered their companions. At last you will choose. But Charles had invited them for an entirely different reason. The dining hall glowed with golden light. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, and the long oak table was set with the finest china and silver. Musicians played softly in the gallery above. Guests arrived in carriages, glittering with jewels and expectation. Charles greeted them all with his usual poise, Henry at his side. The boy clutched Alberta's hand tightly, refusing to let go even as the guests whispered behind their fans. Why is the maid here? One woman hissed. Improper, muttered another. Yet Alberta, though pale, held her chin high. Charles had insisted she be present, not in the background, not in the servants' quarters, but seated at the table beside Henry. Already tongues wagged. Lady Beatrice swept and wearing a gown of emerald silk. Charles, dearest, she cooed, kissing the air near his cheek. How splendid your home looks tonight. Margaret followed, her laughter loud as she launched into tales of her charities. The poor simply adore me, Charles. Imagine the good we could do together. Sophia arrived last, composed as ever. A partnership between us would bring respectability beyond measure. The press would write endlessly of it. Each eyed Alberta with thinly veiled contempt. She looks uncomfortable, Beatrice whispered pointedly. She should, Margaret replied with a sharp smile. Sophia merely sipped her wine. It won't last. When the final course was cleared in glasses filled with champagne, Charles rose from his seat. The room quieted instantly. "Friends," he began, his deep voice steady, "you have joined me tonight not only for fine food and company, but for clarity. There has been much speculation about my future. It's time I put an end to it." The women leaned forward, breaths held. Charles's eyes swept the room, then rested on Alberta. She sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. "My heart, my loyalty, and my future do not lie with wealth, with rank, or with appearances," Charles said slowly. "They lie with the woman who proved her love not with words, but with courage. The woman who risked her life to save my son when others stood still. The woman who has shown me what true devotion means." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Alberta's head jerked up, her eyes wide. Charles extended his hand toward her. "Alberta, you are the woman I choose." Gasps erupted. Wine glasses clinked as they were hastily set down. Lady Beatrice's face drained of color. "The maid," she spat, her voice cracking. Margaret fanned herself furiously. "This is scandalous." Sophia's lips curled into a thin smile. "You'll be ruined, Charles. Utterly ruined." But Charles did not waver. He moved to Alberta's side, helping her to her feet. "If ruin means choosing love over pride, then let ruin come." Henry cheered, clapping his small hands. "I told you, father. I told you to marry her." Laughter broke from some corners of the room, nervous, scandalized, yet tinged with admiration. For though many whispered disapproval, others saw the rare bravery of a man defying convention. Alberta's cheeks burned. She wanted to sink through the floor, to flee from the hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. "Charles, I cannot," she whispered. "Yes, you can," he said firmly, his hand warm around hers. "You told me to prove it, Alberta. Tonight I have. I will not hide you. I will not let society's rules chain us. You are the woman I want, and I will not let fear steal the truth from me." Her eyes filled with tears. "But the others, your friends, your business, your name, none of it matters if I cannot share my life with the woman I love." The word hung in the air, love, undeniable, unashamed. The banquet ended in chaos. Some guests stormed out, offended. Others lingered, curious to see what would happen next. The three women left swiftly, their pride wounded beyond repair. Lady Beatrice muttered about betrayal. Margaret vowed to ruin his reputation. And Sophia glided away in silence, her eyes cold and calculating. But Charles felt only relief, as though years of pretense had finally fallen away. Later that night, the manor was still. Charles walked Alberta to the servants' wing, but she stopped him at the threshold. "This is madness," she whispered. "Do you truly mean to marry me? A maid?" He cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I mean it with every part of me. Alberta, you are not just a maid. You are the woman who has captured both my son's heart and mine. I will fight the world if I must, but I will not lose you." Her breath trembled. She searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. Slowly, hesitantly, she whispered, "Then I am yours." Henry, who had crept out of bed in his nightshirt, came running down the hall. "Did she say yes?" he asked breathlessly. Charles laughed, pulling his son close with one arm and Alberta with the other. "Yes, Henry. She said yes." The boy hugged them both tightly, burying his face against Alberta's gown. "Now we're a real family." And for the first time in years, Charles felt complete. Not as a businessman, not as a figure in society, but as a man simply, wholly, joyfully in love. The next day, newspapers buzzed with the scandal. "Millionaire chooses maid," the headline screamed. Some mocked, others praised, but all spoke of it. And within Whitmore Manor, Alberta woke to find flowers in her chamber. White roses her favorite, though she had never told Charles. A note lay among them, written in his hand. "Soon, my love, Soon you will be not my maid, but my wife." The days that followed the banquet were a storm. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages, each headline more sensational than the last. Whitmore millionaire to wed Maid. Society in shock. A scandalous union. Love or madness. The Whitmore affair. Everywhere Charles went, whispers followed. Some clapped him on the back with admiration. Others turned away in disdain. His business partners warned him of reputational risks. The aristocracy scoffed openly. But Charles stood unmoved. For every critic, there was a voice of quiet approval. Letters arrived daily, some mocking yes, but others full of gratitude from ordinary men and women who saw in Charles's choice a glimmer of hope. At last, one letter read, "A man of wealth has chosen love over rank." Alberta, however, struggled with the weight of it. She remained in the manor, but each morning she woke fearing she might ruin Charles's life. One afternoon, as Charles returned from a meeting, he found Alberta in the garden, hands buried in the soil. She was planting roses with Henry, who darted happily between the flower beds. "You should be resting," Charles said gently, kneeling beside her. She brushed dirt from her hands, refusing to meet his eyes. "Perhaps they are right," she murmured. "Perhaps I don't belong in your world. I am only a maid, Charles. Nothing more. Only a maid." His voice carried steel. He lifted her chin until her eyes met his. "You are the woman who saved my son's life. The woman who gave him laughter again. The woman who showed me what it means to be loved for who I am, not for my wealth. That is worth more than all the titles in London." Henry tugged at Alberta's sleeve. "Papa's right. Don't let them scare you. You're my mum now. No one can change that." Her heart melted at the boy's words. Slowly she nodded. "Very well. If you will not give up on me, then I will not give up on us." Plans for the wedding began at once. But unlike the extravagant affair society expected, Charles insisted on something different. "No ballroom," he said. "No endless lists of nobles. I want simplicity. I want sincerity." The ceremony was to be held in the Whitmore family chapel, small but beautiful, nestled on the estate grounds. Invitations went only to close friends, trusted business allies, and a handful of servants who had long been part of the household. When word spread, scandalized gentry sneered. "How quaint," Lady Beatrice said bitterly. Margaret declared the union doomed within a year. Sophia, ever poised, remarked coldly, "He has tied himself to ruin." But Charles ignored them. His focus remained only on Alberta and Henry. The night before the wedding, Alberta stood before her mirror in a simple white gown. It was nothing like the silks of noble brides, plain, unadorned, but elegant in its honesty. She traced the fabric with trembling hands. "Can I truly do this?" she wondered. "Can I step into his world, knowing they will never accept me?" A knock sounded at the door. Henry peeked in, his small face glowing with excitement. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A little." "Don't be," he said with certainty only a child could hold. "Papa loves you. I love you. That's all that matters." Her eyes brimmed with tears. She knelt, pulling him close. "Oh, Henry, you've given me the courage I never thought I'd have." The chapel bells rang softly in the crisp morning air. Guests gathered, whispering behind gloved hands. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine affection. Charles stood at the altar, his heart pounding. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the young, powerful millionaire. But his eyes betrayed a nervous joy. When the chapel doors opened, silence fell. Alberta entered on Henry's arm, for she had no family present. The boy walked proudly beside her, chest puffed out, as though escorting a queen. She wore her simple gown, her hair swept up with a single white rose. There were no jewels, no veil worth a fortune. Yet in that moment, She shone brighter than any aristocrat. Charles's breath caught. She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. The priest spoke, but Charles hardly heard the words. His world had narrowed to the woman standing before him. When it was time for vows, he took her hands firmly. Alberta, you came into my life quietly, without fanfare. I did not see you at first, but my son did. You gave him love, laughter, and safety when I was too blind to notice. Then, when danger struck, you risked everything to save him. From that moment, I saw you for who you truly are. The bravest, kindest, most selfless woman I have ever known. Today, I vow to honor you, to cherish you, and to stand beside you for all my days. Tears streamed down Alberta's cheeks. When her turn came, her voice shook, but her words carried strength. Charles, I never dreamed I would stand here. I was content to serve quietly, to remain unseen. But you saw me not as a servant, but as a woman, and more than that, as a partner. I vow to stand beside you through all trials, to love Henry as my own, and to give you the devotion not of wealth or station, but of a heart that is wholly yours. Henry squeezed her hand between theirs. I promise too, he whispered, making the guests chuckle softly. I promise to be the best son for both of you. When Charles kissed Alberta, the chapel erupted in applause. Some clapped politely. Others cheered with genuine joy. A few shook their heads in disapproval. But it no longer mattered. For Charles, Alberta, and Henry, the world had faded away. They were a family now whole unbreakable. The reception was held in the manor gardens. Long tables were filled with simple but hearty food, music played, and laughter filled the air. Servants danced alongside merchants. Children ran freely among the roses. It was not the grand ball society expected. It was better. It was real. Charles and Alberta danced beneath the twilight sky, Henry darting between them with boundless energy. For once there was no pretense, no division of rank, only joy. That night, as the manor grew quiet and the last guest departed, Charles and Alberta stood together on the balcony, Henry asleep in his room. Do you regret it? She asked softly, leaning against him. Not for a moment, he said, kissing her temple. I thought wealth was everything, Alberta. But tonight I know the truth. Wealth fades. Status fades. But love endures. She smiled, her hand resting on his chest. Then let us endure together. Below them, the garden bloomed with the roses she and Henry had planted, a living reminder of how far they had come. Months later, the whispers had quieted. Some still sneered, but many had come to respect Charles's choice. Business thrived, not in spite of his marriage, but because of the loyalty his courage inspired. And within the Whitmore estate, laughter echoed daily. Henry's playful shouts, Alberta's gentle songs, and Charles's deep, contented chuckles. No longer just a millionaire's mansion, it was a home. The story of Charles, Alberta, and Henry became a quiet legend whispered through London. The tale of a man who defied wealth and chose love, of a maid who became a wife, and of a boy who finally found his mother.